So everything's ready.
Yep. Okay. It is taking us live on YouTube right now.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, and we are live. Welcome to Nerd Church, the place where on Sundays we read through the Catholic lectionary and on Thursdays tell you all about some of the weird and wild and wacky parts of the Catholic Church. Today, Aldo has found us a fascinating video by it's an interview with celebrity exorcist Chad Rippenger, um, who has all kinds of really interesting and possibly heterodox positions about a whole lot of things. And we're going to talk about it and we'll see how far we get. I labeled this video part one because I doubt we'll get through the whole interview today because it's a lot.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So Aldo has control of the video today. So whenever you're ready to get started.
Okay. Let me know when it's
Okay.
showing.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I can see it now.
Okay, perfect. So this is a it comes from Sean Ryan's channel, and it is just the excerpt where they talk about the Jewish temple and why it will never be rebuilt. But the whole show is like over 4 hours long.
Yeah. we would still be doing this next year if we watched the whole 4 hours.
Right. But this is the one that showed up on my feed, and I, right off the bat, I found so many, how could I call them, issues with the way Father Rippinger is, um, you know, providing information and the way he phrases it, and but we will talk about it
Yeah.
as we start watching it.
Yep.
Okay, so without further ado,
Yep.
let's start.
What about the temple? According to the fathers of the church, at least the ones that I've read, they said the temple will never be rebuilt. And the will never be. It will never be rebuilt. And the reason being is because, first of all, Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it and it was destroyed.
Okay. So, so the first thing, so I want to make this as logical as possible. I mean, of course, there was an emotional reaction to this material, but I think it is more important to show the kind of fallacies that he uses in his arguments. So he starts by saying that the fathers of the church said that he quotes the fathers of the church as authorities, and he says that at least the ones he has read said that the temple would never be rebuilt. So that is a problem
Yeah.
because first of all, it sounds to me that he's voicing his opinion, and since his opinion isn't well structured in this rational sense. He then tries to use the fathers of the church, which I really doubt if 95% of the viewers of this video actually know who the fathers of the church are. And
And
then he tries to use them as to leverage them as authority to back up his opinion. And it is an opinion because I'm going to explain why in just a moment.
yeah. And it's also worth pointing out just quickly that when people talk about the church fathers, they're essentially talking about everyone who was being active and writing and influencing kind of the way that Christianity took shape from about the second to the middle of the fifth century. So that includes a whole bunch of people. And it also includes, people like Origen, who, although a lot of Catholics, will still quote him and read him and have respect for what he had to say, also, you know, he had some ideas that were later regarded as heretical. So the idea that you could just say the church fathers and, or at least the ones that I've read, well, I will guarantee you he hasn't read all of them, because only people who are specialists in patristics have read all of them, because you can spend a really long time just reading the church fathers.
Right. And something else I would like to point out, just as you were telling us and describing who the church fathers are, it is that since you have people in different locations, in different times, and even some with a different background, whether it's cultural, linguistic, that further complicates the matter of just saying the church fathers, right? So you may have some coming from Syria, speaking Syriac, which is a Semitic language, others who would be speaking Greek. Some were converts, some were born from Christian families. And we should bear in mind that at this stage there's still much Christian diversity, but later on, despite this diversity, the Catholic Church would just group them up in the way that seems a better fit to their intellectual heritage.
Yeah. And to some degree that makes sense, because the reason why that period of time is important is because the idea is that all of the ideas that would later become Orthodox Christianity were on the table. So it's a way of like going back to kind of like, okay, this isn't the generation of the apostles, this isn't scripture, but these are still people who, perhaps had studied with Paul or had studied with Peter or one of their students. So presumably they're going to have their words are going to get a little bit more weight and a little bit more authority. So in that sense, it makes sense to talk about them as a group. But if you're talking about, this one particular point about the reconstruction of the temple, it's ridiculous, because there's very rarely unanimity in that period.
Exactly. And well, I would like just to point out that even me, coming from a Catholic family, I didn't know about the church fathers until about some 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I always saw that period, let's say, between the completion of the New Testament and the Council of Nicaea, as a dark period. But it seems that it was a surprise to me to notice that there was this very rich literature where there's all these religious leaders around the Mediterranean and the the Middle East, who were discussing about central issues to the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Then let's see. So he starts by saying that the temple will not be rebuilt. That's according to the church fathers, which whom he has read. But just doing a quick search, there's you can notice that his let's see that his it is a it comes with its caveats, because there is no unanimity. And I could start by citing Irenaeus of Lyon, who is one of the church fathers.
Mhm.
And he says, he shall sit in the temple of God. So in his book Against Heresies, he's referring to this abomination of desolation, which would who would sit in the temple. So he's referring to an actual building, to an actual structure. So that is one against Ripperger's claims.
Yeah. Well, maybe he hasn't read Irenaeus.
Yeah, that must be the case. And that's on the 2nd century.
Yeah.
Then Hippolytus of Rome in the 3rd century. He talks about a future temple. He explicitly says the temple in Jerusalem shall be rebuilt. So he's expecting the rebuilding of a temple.
Yeah.
We then go to Cyril of Jerusalem in the 4th century. And he's again, using this episode from the abomination of desolation. So he says, the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God. Let's see. Augustine of Hippo, 4th and 5th century. Well, here's where the interpretation starts changing. And he says, some think this was said of the temple in Jerusalem, others that it refers to the church. So he's talking about the abomination of desolation, and they are discussing whether it's actually meaning the temple or it's actually meaning the church, the Christian church, the structure of the Christian church. And then John Chrysostom on the 4th century. Then he actually says, God has destroyed it and no one shall rebuild it. So that's despite Ripperger not citing John Chrysostom. This is an actual church father who claims that the temple will not be rebuilt, the temple in Jerusalem. Then Jerome in the 4th and 5th century seems to be using and recycling Augustine of Hippo's interpretation that it may be either referring to the temple in Jerusalem or the church. So let's see. And so what I would like to point out is that he's, first of all, for making such a bold claim, he's not providing us with quotations. He's not providing us with the whole picture because, as you can see from the little quotes, the short quotes I just read for you, that there was diversity in opinion. There was diversity in interpretation. So it was not as monolithic as he pretends to make us believe. And that is a problem because he's giving people the wrong impression. So my guess is that this happens as with any kind of information. We just go with the shock of the statement, but actually very few of us would take the time to check on the information that they are providing us. So he's also appealing to authority in the sense that since he's a father, since he's an exorcist, since he's a Catholic, then in the minds of the rest of the people, average people, they would say this man is speaking the truth, and there's no reason to fact check him.
Yeah, because the fact of the matter is that generally Catholic priests receive a pretty decent education in church history. And generally, they're a pretty reliable source. If you go to your average priest and ask them, what's the history of, this particular religious practice, they'll have factually correct information. Unfortunately, that means that when you have more marginal figures like Rippenger, start going around and telling people things that are just not true, that a lot of people, if they aren't themselves educated in it, will just figure, okay, that was what the priest said. It must be at least close to accurate.
Correct. And that becomes a problem because this claim is, goes out of control, and it takes a life of its own. So then people will start arguing about that. And in all fairness, we could just turn it around on him, and I could just generalize and say that the church fathers um, also claimed that the Jewish people would never return to the Holy Land. And of course, we know that isn't true. And even in some Christian communities, this has become a problem because I guess the argument is something along the lines that so if the Jewish people would be wandering around the world without having their own land, then that is a failed prophecy. But the mere fact, and I will come back to this point later, that the temple has not been rebuilt yet doesn't mean that it may not be rebuilt later. Of course, I can't tell you whether it will be rebuilt or not, but that is just a logical conclusion,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
We
and I mean,
Mhm.
I think that it's safe to say at this point that rebuilding the temple would be a bad idea for geopolitical reasons, but also is something that a lot of, modern Jewish people aren't sure if it would be a good idea or not, because, modern rabbinic Judaism exists because the temple isn't there, and because there's a whole lot of of things, of ceremonies that are done, sacrifices that can't be done in the absence of the temple, that have to be done elsewhere, which means that there's a lot of Jews who say, basically we did that, it was ended not by our choice, but in the end, we're living in the world where the temple doesn't exist, and maybe we don't need it to exist.
Mhm.
And then there are other Jews who think that, yeah, we should have our temple because things were good when we had the temple. And, that's part of the debate that I don't feel like I can comment on because, I'm not Jewish. I don't know what it feels like to not have a temple. But, it's worth noting that it is a debate within Judaism.
Exactly. So, and just the reason that there is a debate, it also doesn't mean that the temple would not be rebuilt, even though some a part of the Jewish communities would be in favor of rebuilding the temple, and another part would be against it. It doesn't mean that the temple would either be rebuilt or would not be rebuilt. So, the coin is still
Yeah.
in the air.
And particularly when there's a lot of Protestant Christians who call themselves Zionists, who don't who don't want the temple to be rebuilt because they necessarily love Jewish people, but because they believe, according to their interpretation of the book of Revelation, that the temple has to be rebuilt so that the Antichrist can destroy the temple and kill. And then at that point, all of the Jews will either die or be converted to Christianity, which is a horrible thing to even think about, and is not something that, you know, obviously anybody who's, yeah, I want the world to end so that all the Jews can die, is probably not going to want the temple to be rebuilt in a way that's necessarily going to benefit is going to benefit Jewish people. And I worry that there are a certain number of Jews who are forming political alliances with Protestants that don't have their best interest at heart. And and part of the reason I say that is because I see Catholics making alliances with Protestants who don't have our best interest at heart. And that I think is turning out to be a real mistake. But anyway, go on.
Sure. Well, I should also like to tell the audience, in case you don't know, there is actually a thing, there is a Temple Institute. So they are, they are found in Jerusalem, and they have already reconstructed most of the vestments for the priests and the high priest. They have reconstructed the vessels, silver, copper, gold for actually doing the rituals in the temple. So it is for some factions of the Jewish people, it is a thing. It is something that could happen. So it is not far-fetched that
And
they.
yeah, and I believe there's at least one cattle ranch that has a herd of red cows where the heifers, like, basically they've bred a breed of cow that match the description of the red heifer that's required in numbers.
Correct.
So yeah, I mean there are people who are ready and who also have found Cohens, because the Cohens still know who they are
Mhm.
and have trained them to perform the sacrifices. Although I don't know if they've figured out who gets to be high priest.
Yeah, that would be interesting. It would be interesting to understand the process and the logic behind appointing a new high priest after
Yeah.
more than 2,000 years. And just going back a little to the red heifers. So this is a sacrifice which is described in the book of Numbers. And the idea is that there are different levels of impurity, ritual impurity in Rabbinic Judaism, reinterpreting anything we have about the purity laws in the Torah. So the greatest impurity a person can acquire is is having contact with a corpse, with a human corpse. And the idea behind this sacrifice of the red heifer is that so they sacrifice the heifer, which has lots of requirements, and Rabbinic Judaism makes it almost impossible to get the heifer right. And if you have ever heard about the red heifer, they always disqualify the heifer because it grew a little too much, or it didn't have it had three hairs of a different color other than red, and so on and so on, so on and so forth. And then so the idea is that they burn the body of the heifer, and they get the ashes, and the ashes would then be put into a vessel with pure water, and they would sprinkle just like in Catholic Mass, where they would sprinkle you with holy water. That's exactly the same thing they would do, and the people would be purified from this contact from the dead, which is a requirement to be able to perform sacrifices to enter the temple. And despite people calling it a prophecy, it is not. There is no prophecy about the red heifer. The red heifer could be done. The red heifer sacrifice could be done at any point in history, and that would facilitate the rebuilding of the temple, because then people would be able to step into the Temple Mount. Back in the times of Maimonides in the 12th century, he recommended people not going into the Temple Mount, and that even goes back to rabbinic sources in the Talmud, where the rabbis would not let people go into the area, into the raised area of the Temple Mount, because they were impure. So despite the temple not being physically there, the place, the foundations, uh, you should not be walking through them in a state of impurity.
Yeah. And part of that is also that they don't know exactly where the Holy of Holies used to be. So there would also be the possibility of accidentally profaning the Holy of Holies
Correct.
by stepping on there.
So it's a can of worms for the Jews as well. So it isn't just that. So he has this position about wielding the church fathers as authority to claim that the temple would not be rebuilt. And on the Jewish side, of course, it isn't that easy either, because of all these complications I have just talked about: ritual purity, the location of the temple, which you mentioned, political instability, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah. Well, and also the dome of, specifically the dome of the rock
Mhm.
is built on the Temple Mount, because in Islam it there's a description of Muhammad making a night journey, which is generally understood to be something that Muhammad was literally physically picked up and taken to Jerusalem. And there's a rock on the Temple Mount that is supposed to have the impression of his foot in there.
Mhm.
And there's a extraordinarily holy mosque that was built on that Temple Mount, which would almost certainly have to be removed if the if the temple were to be reconstructed. And the world, like the Dome of the Rock in Islam is the second holiest site after Mecca. So to remove that would be incredibly offensive and upsetting to the world's Muslim population. And it just wouldn't be good.
Right. And if we just go the doomsday way, we would say that it would trigger World War III.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, whether or not you think that rebuilding the temple would do anything supernatural, there's no question that rebuilding the temple would start a war.
Correct. And I'm glad you just talked about that, because uh, again, in rabbinic sources, there's this debate whether the temple would be rebuilt by people, whether it would be rebuilt by the Messiah. So they couldn't, there wasn't just an opinion regarding the reconstruction of the temple.
Yeah.
Let's see. So he then mentions Julian the Apostate. So
Yeah.
for those of you who do not know about Julian the Apostate, he was a Roman emperor who reigned from 361 to 363 of the Common Era, and perhaps he was born Christian. Sources are not clear. And at a certain point in his life, he decided to revert to the Roman religion. So that is reinstituting the old religion against he came just after Constantine. So it was just a very short period of time where the empire becomes Christian, and then here comes Julian the Apostate, and he wants to throw all that off the window and get back to uh, the Roman religion. And the interesting part about Julian the Apostate is that he wanted to rebuild the temple, not because he were, very fond of the Jews, but because he just wanted to strike a blow against Christianity, in the sense that if Jesus prophesied that the temple would never be rebuilt, then it would be he would be, kind of rubbing it in the face of Jesus that, see, I helped the Jews to rebuild the temple.
Yeah. And Julian is a really interesting figure too, because in a lot of ways, what he was trying to do was to create, like, what was to recreate Roman paganism in a way where there actually would have been defined defined theology and a defined creed and a and an institutional priesthood and things like that, that was all run by the state. And not that the Roman state, the Roman state religion had always had that kind of organizational structure, but it really didn't have as much to do with belief as it did with practice. So if Julian had lived a little bit longer, it would have been really interesting to see kind of what Roman paganism turned into. But that's one of those, like, great unknowns of history. Like, what if Julian had lived?
Right. Yeah, that is one of the most intriguing and fascinating speculations in history. Or perhaps even whether the temple would not be, if the temple were not destroyed, what would have happened
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
first place. Okay, so just to give people some context, there's some very interesting testimonies, some contemporary, about this attempt from Julian to rebuild the temple. And the reason that this, and Father Ripperger does not mention this in the video, at least in the part we have just seen, we have just watched, there were some strange episodes happening during when they were trying to lay the foundations for the new temple. So we have a text called the Amnianus Marcellinus, and it says, balls of fire bursting forth near the foundations made the place inaccessible. So something happened, and this fiery phenomenon didn't allow people to lay the foundations. But to be fair, it never links this episode with any kind of divine intervention. And then we go to Gregory of Nazianzus, where he says, fire came forth and stopped the work. So he's a Christian, and he is already interpreting this as divine intervention to stop the reconstruction of the temple. Then John Chrysostom.
To be fair, fireballs sound pretty divine intervention-y to
me. But they are not saying that it was specifically the God of Israel, or the father of Jesus, the one who is doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you want to look at it that way. And then just John Chrysostom only says no one has been able to rebuild it, commenting on this episode. Then another author, Socrates Scholasticus, flames of fire burned the workmen. And just by reading this, it reminded me of there is a Mishnah. So the Mishnah is this one of the first documents from Rabbinic Judaism. It was completed around the beginning of the 3rd century by Rabbi Judah the Prince, and it collects traditions on legal decisions regarding Jewish law. And one of them, there are many regarding the sacrifices, regarding keeping the Sabbath, benedictions, agricultural laws relating to the Torah. And then there's this strange story about a priest who was in the temple, and for some reason, he was preparing wood for the altar, and he noticed that the pavement was different in his section of the place where he was in this, how do you call it in English? Atrium?
Atrium, yeah.
Atrium. And so he notices this, and he immediately thought, well, perhaps this is the place where the Ark of the Covenant was hidden. And he goes out of that place to tell the other priests, and he fell dead on the spot because he wasn't supposed to reveal that. And it is interesting because so if he wasn't supposed to reveal the location of the Ark of the Covenant, then how do we get this tradition?
Yeah.
And then, later rabbinic scholars from the period of the Talmud,
Yeah.
So later rabbinic traditions just start adding supernatural elements, and they say that this priest, for some reason, was, banging on the pavement with a hammer or a sledgehammer, and then fire bursted out from the pavement and killed him. So there's this repetition of this element of the foundations or the floor, and then fireballs coming out of the floor or being near the floor. So I'm not sure if they are just recycling this idea, this memory from Julian the Apostate's attempt to rebuild the temple, or it was a tradition which already existed and was taken from Jewish sources into these patristic sources and pagan sources.
Yeah. Okay, so we've only gotten 2 minutes in. So let's see what else they have to say.
Sure, let's see.
In the process, Christ actually put an end to the Jewish sacrifice on purpose, because the Jewish sacrifice in the Old Testament was a lead up or a prefigurement of Christ. And so he gave them one generation in order for them to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't, he put an end to their sacrifice.
So here's another interesting thing. So he's projecting back an idea that the Jews had to convert. Now, if you read the Gospels, you will notice that there are some places where Jesus actually says that he comes for the people of Israel and to deliver his message to them. But then when that doesn't happen, he goes to the Gentiles. Conveniently, that happens after his crucifixion, after his resurrection. So he changes plans after being crucified, and he just changes focus from the Jewish people to the pagans, to the wrongly called pagans, and the rest of the Mediterranean world.
It's also just worth mentioning quickly that Rippenger says, they had they had a generation to convert, and then the temple got destroyed. Well, if we subtract 70 from 33, that's 37 years, which normally when people are talking about a human generation, that's 20 years. Now, this may just kind of seem like nitpicking, but my point is that even in Rippenger's own timeline, they would have had something like 2 generations to convert, even if we're looking at the end of the temple sacrifice being in 70. It's also worth pointing out that that the Samaritans, who still believe that Mount Gerizim is the place that sacrifice ought to be offered, have been offering their sacrifices continuously on Mount Gerizim for this entire period, even though the Bible, the New Testament talks about Jesus converting a certain number of Samaritans. So just as an argument, it doesn't hold up.
Exactly. And the idea is that he's reluctant to deliver his message to the others. So it is a salvation that should be embraced by the Jews and not by the Gentiles. Then let's see.
Speaking, there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years because it's
Okay, so this one, there hasn't been practicing Jews for 2,000 years. I think most of the Jewish people would disagree.
Yeah.
Because, I think it is intellectually unfair and dishonest to just try to hijack what Judaism actually is or isn't. So his Father Rippenger is trying to define Judaism as a temple based religion, which is not the case, because that is, it was a traumatic event for the Jews of that generation, having the temple destroyed not for the first time, but for the second time. And so they had to reorganize and reconstruct their religion from the foundations of faith, to be able to survive. So they move this temple-based, this sacrifice-based tradition to a tradition of Jewish religion would partake of these festivals, which were performed in the temple, but now at the dinner table in every Jewish home and at the synagogues. So
yeah, and just to amplify your point, I mean, the fact of the matter is Judaism in the 21st century different than it was in the first century? Yes. But can you draw an absolute straight line from the practices of the first century to the practices of the 21st century? Also, yes.
Exactly. It is not completely linear, but to be fair, we could just say that, we could just claim the same for any kind of religion, including Christianity, because if I know some, or perhaps all of any Christian movement would like to think that they are preserving Christianity exactly the way they think, and I want to underscore this, the way they think Jesus preached his message, which isn't historically, it isn't true. It is very difficult to trace back any kind of Christian tradition exactly to all the words of Jesus. And what we have actually is, negotiating with these traditions, which are sometimes contradictory. And then you put together the version of Christianity that you embrace.
Right. And I have to say, like, for the most part, the Catholic Church, in at least the mainstream Catholic Church, tries to do a good job of being intellectually honest and saying, these are the core things, these are the core ideas that we're not going to change and we're not going to compromise on. And then there are other things that are culturally determined that can change. Whereas Rippenger just wants to deny the reality of all that and just say that, you know, that his version of the Catholic Church is the correct version that has existed since Peter, which is, again, historically illiterate.
Correct. Okay, let's move on. We're just
Oh,
30
yeah.
seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
The temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been able to enact their primary religious duties, which is to offer sacrifice. Plus their Levitic line, which is their priestly line.
So it's interesting that he says that you know, the most important thing in the for the Jewish people is sacrifices, right? So perhaps he's just trying to reinforce this idea of the prophetic critique which Jesus appeals to whenever he's in the temple. So we have some very interesting things regarding Jesus and the temple. On the one hand, he is critical of the temple, but on the other hand, if you notice, he's always hanging around in the temple. So which one is it? Was he against the temple? Was he against the sacrifices? Was he more in favor of, you know, helping others, the intention behind the sacrifices? Because I can't remember the exact passage, but he says something along the lines that if you're mm, if you have some kind of issue with your brother, you should not go. You should make peace with him, and then go and make your sacrifice. So that means having your, you know, perhaps this the correct spiritual energy
Yeah.
where this, you know, betraying me right now, but I hope you get the point.
Yeah, that what's important is the internal attitude as you're making the sacrifice, not just, yeah, exactly. Jesus, when he's criticizing people for fasting or doing that, he's criticizing them for going through the form without the right, like, interior disposition.
Mhm.
But he's not attacking the idea of just going to the temple and offering sacrifice. Because, you know, certainly, like, you know, the Bible also talks about how, you know, his parents went to the temple and made the appropriate sacrifice to redeem the firstborn, you know, when he was a baby. And that, you know, is a religious holiday in the Catholic Church. It's like, yeah, it's that happened. So the idea that Jesus was, or even, you know, prior to 70, people, I think there's an argument to be made that they might have been expecting the temple to be destroyed and rebuilt. But I don't think that the idea of, oh, we're going to abolish the whole sacrificial system is something that's in there. At most, it was about changing the sacrificial system.
And yeah, so let's move on. Let's see.
Yeah.
Was destroyed. So, but then, and the difficulty is people tend to misinterpret the book of Daniel, which says when the abomination of desolation takes its seat in the temple. What they don't realize is that is not a reference to the Jewish temple. That's where the Protestants are getting it wrong. So a lot of the Protestants are thinking, oh, well, let's help the Jews rebuild the temple, and then that will usher in, because Christ is going to return, you know, after the temple. They think the temple is going to be rebuilt, and then.
Okay, so this is what we were touching on the first part, and you know, it was a longer section because we had to provide you with some background, but Rippenger is making use of this kind of arguments. So he's already talking about this idea from John Chrysostom, whether it was was it just John Chrysostom? Or at least the idea that it wasn't referring to the temple, to the Jerusalem temple, but to the church.
Yeah, that was I believe that what you said was that idea that it was the church seems to have originated with Saint Augustine,
Mhm.
which makes sense because Augustine was um, really the first person to make like a really like solid argument that ended up becoming the dominant position, that basically the things that occur, the stories in the Bible are not necessarily meant to be read literally, but can also have a symbolic or an allegorical meaning on top of that. And that in some cases, the allegorical meaning is more is more useful and will get you closer to the truth than just going with the plain reading. Now, I should also point out that Rippinger's critique of the Protestant position, where you have, the temples rebuilt and you have the end of the world, that's based on a really um, weird to Catholic ears, and well, really to anyone's ears, reading of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. The idea that that is not a correct interpretation is something that pretty much all Catholics agree on. Like this kind of post millennial interpretation of the Bible, where we're looking for the Antichrist and blood moons and all this kind of stuff, is regarded by the Catholic Church as a formal heresy
Mhm.
and is rejected. And that, of course, is why figures like Rippenger are so problematic, is because if I'm listening to this with my Catholic brain on, I'm kind of thinking, oh, he just said some kind of stuff about the church fathers that I'm not quite sure about. But then he pivots to saying something that is a perfectly normal Catholic position. So that
Mhm.
makes it easy for people to kind of follow his argument and then continue following him on the places where he is very much outside of, and in some cases in opposition to, the actual teachings of the Catholic Church.
Correct. So the problem I have with him is that he's like throwing to us some half-hearted or perhaps some heavily edited data. And as you say, he's then combining them with these Catholic positions. So they all get mixed up, and then so people will be more easily confused because of this combination of data. So they will not be able to separate what is his opinion, what is fact, and what is a Catholic belief, dogma, or whatever. And that is where the information gets murky, where his exposition becomes dishonest, because I cannot find another word. And I mean, I'm not sure if he's doing this intentionally, or he's just being like very very smart about the way he's wording this. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
cannot tell by the video, but I would like to think that he's an intelligent person, and in some way he's um, manipulating the information, because he's not a fool.
Well, he's not stupid, and he's not stupid, and he's not uneducated. And at a
Mhm.
certain point, you have to say, well, if he's not uneducated and he's not stupid, and there's at least some evidence that there's at least some element of him cherry picking his data to come to the to support the conclusion that he wants. So he's not being entirely intellectually honest.
Correct. Okay, let's move on.
As a result of that, so what I should say, the temple has to be rebuilt in order for the Antichrist to put himself in there. So let's do that so that the Antichrist will come, and then that means that Christ will come, and that's kind of their reasoning behind it. Well, first of all, just getting through the years of the Antichrist is going to be brutal, so I wouldn't be pushing that. But the fathers of the church are very clear that it will never be rebuilt, and that the reference to the abomination of desolation taking its seat in the temple is actually a reference to the Catholic Church.
So that is what we were just talking about right now. So he's taking this allegorical interpretation just to support the fact that he believes or wants to make people believe that the temple will not be rebuilt. And just to give people some background on the abomination of desolation, the abomination of desolation appears in the book of Daniel. And it isn't clear what it is, how they would define this abomination of desolation. But we have a scholarship and even ancient authors like Porphyry, whose works did not survive because Christian emperors commanded to destroy all of his works. Porphyry regarded the book of Daniel as a book which was making reference to the Maccabean War, which so the book of Daniel is supposedly dated to the 6th century. It's everything that is happening in it happens in the sixth century before Christ, and then but it's actually later. So we have perhaps the historical Daniel. We have the Maccabean revolt where the Jews had to rededicate the temple because the Hellenistic culture, they were sacrificing pigs and the other kind of sacrifices which were not required by Jewish law. And then we have the actual composition of the book of Daniel some years after this book of the Maccabees. So what they're actually telling is about this. Perhaps there was some kind of statue or cultic element that was placed in the Holy of Holies. By this time, the second temple did not have in the Holy of Holies the Ark of the Covenant, so it was just a dark, empty room. And we have from Jewish sources and from Hellenistic sources attempts from Roman emperors like Pompey, who wanted to go into the temple to the Holy of Holies to know exactly what was in there, because for Romans and Greeks, it was the most bizarre and the weirdest thing in the world that the Jews said that their God was invisible, immaterial, because they were expecting to see some kind of sculpture or some kind of cultic object in the Holy of Holies. And
Yeah. And there were also historically when, for example, the Romans were bringing in the legion standards that had, various images of emperors and gods and so on into the temple, that also got described as the abomination of desolation.
correct. The mere fact that these standards or flags,
standards.
the standards had this Roman eagle, or perhaps if they were from the 10th Legion, they would have the image of a boar. That was considered idolatry.
Yeah. So the point is that abomination of desolation got applied to basically anything that happened that profaned the temple.
Correct.
So trying to pick out one thing and saying, aha, that is the abomination of desolation is impossible. If it happens, we'll know, but until then, who knows what it'll be.
Exactly. And just to close this section on the abomination of desolation, there is yet another interpretation So the temple was destroyed in the year 70 AD, and then there came two other Jewish revolts. The last Jewish revolt was in the year 135, and it was led by a messianic figure called Bar Kokhba, which means the son of the star. And so when this man's rebellion was crushed by the Romans, they finally destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the little that survived from the previous war. And then what they did is they built on top of the Temple Mount a temple to Jupiter, and they renamed Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina, and they changed the name from the Kingdom of Israel or the Kingdom of Judah to Syria Palestina. That is where we get the name of Palestine nowadays, which is a very loaded term. And so some say that perhaps they are, so the gospel writers are alluding to that event, then placing the actual composition of the gospels into the 2nd century. So they are referring to this abomination of desolation as the building of that temple to Jupiter after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Okay.
That's what the Father said it's a reference to. That there's going to be some way in which the situation in the church will become compromised to such a degree. It doesn't mean necessarily people have to note it, but its essential elements will still remain intact. But that the Catholic Church itself would become compromised in that.
And now, of course, he's a Catholic priest, but there is another problematic statement which is showing, and he's trying to make us believe that by then there was a Catholic Church in the sense that it is exactly the same Catholic Church as we have it today.
Yeah. Also, what he is referring to is something that is really prominent in a lot of traditionalist Catholic circles, particularly since Vatican II, but there started being this kind of current of thought starting in the 19th century that basically is saying that the current changes in the church after Vatican II have essentially transformed the Catholic Church into that what they use various terms, like they call it like the synodal church or the ape of the church, right? That basically the Catholic Church as it is lived and exists and experienced by the majority of the world's Catholics isn't really the Catholic Church, and that the real Catholic Church is in the hands of people like Father Rippenger, and that, you know, the end of the world is going to come really, really soon, and we're all going to find out that they're right and we're wrong.
Correct. We were, I think we missed another statement, which he says that the Levitical line was destroyed.
Yeah.
It wasn't destroyed. It was, there's actually lots of testimonies from rabbinic literature that, well, you know, of course, there was no temple, so the priests were not able to appoint, you know, to perform the sacrifices and the services in the temple, neither the Levites. But that doesn't mean they were just like selectively destroyed.
Yeah.
And we have testimonies in rabbinic literature about rabbis who were Kohanim, that is the Hebrew term for priests. And there's even this, if you talk to almost any kind of Jewish person, they would tell you that that they know and you made reference of this. You made reference to this at the beginning of the video, that they know who uh, who is a descendant from the priests,
Yeah.
and they have kept a record of that precisely because there is still this expectation to rebuild the temple.
Yeah. And specifically the last name, the surnames Levy and Cohen
Mhm.
indicate that that's where your ancestors came from. And in fact, in the last maybe 25 years, there's actually been genetic testing um, of men whose surname is Levy and whose surname is Cohen. And they actually have a very specific marker on their Y chromosome that traces back to a common male ancestor. And yeah, I mean, basically, the answer to the question is, are there still people around who are of the hereditary priestly bloodline? Yes. Do they know who they are? Also, yes. Can
Yes.
they prove it? Yes, again.
And I think there's even a book regarding this specific point. And the author of the book, I will try to look it up later. So the author of the book collects and compiles all these testimonies from ancient Jewish literature, where they give you all this information on the surviving priests after the destruction of the temple and the Levites. So it isn't. I mean, we would not be asking Father Ripperger or any other Catholic priest to know this kind of information, but the information is out there. So, but on the
Well,
other hand, we live in a time where you can just look up for any kind of information. So it is
yeah.
no excuse that he doesn't know
Well,
it.
and I mean, again, your average Catholic priest who's, saying mass, baptizing babies, doing confessions, he doesn't need to know all of the details of this, because he's also not going around shooting his mouth off about how the temple will never be rebuilt and how, modern Jews aren't really practicing their religion properly and all of the other nonsense that's coming out of Rippinger's mouth.
Right.
So,
And sure.
okay, let's see
Please
what
go
else
ahead.
Rippinger has to say.
Okay.
So Michael, the general belief among the theologians and who have studied this and that type of thing is that he's actually one of the archangels. So he's from the second of the lowest ranks. So which is actually one of the reasons why it's so humiliating for Satan to get kicked out of heaven by him, is because it was humiliating. But as Thomas Aquinas says, anybody in heaven has what they call prelation over anything below them. And so those in hell, anybody in heaven can cast out any demon in hell, God permitting. But St. Michael is, most people are unaware of it. St. Michael is actually the guardian angel of the elect. So those who are, God has pre-chosen that they're going to go to heaven. And so.
Okay, so obviously he's giving a Christian interpretation about Archangel Michael. But if you ask, the Jewish people, they would tell you a whole different story. So uh, Michael is one of the two angels who are called by name in scriptures. In the Old Testament, we have Michael, who is the prince. So he's a prince of the people of Israel, and he in the book of Daniel he goes on to fight the prince of Persia, not the video game, but
Yeah.
the angelic prince of Persia. So
Al-
the
al-
idea
al-
behind this. Mhm.
Although I was just going to say, I would love to have a video game where you get to play the Archangel Michael. That would be kind of awesome.
Exactly, yeah. I would pay to have that one as well. So the idea here is that so God, if you notice in Genesis, God is like very personal. So he appears to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he appears to Abraham, and he wrestles with Jacob, and then along the time, he starts becoming like even more distant. And the way to make God distant but closer to the Jewish people in this way is creating this idea of the angelic princes. And so in later Jewish tradition, there are 72 nations, and each nation has its angelic prince. So Michael is the angelic prince appointed to the people of Israel. And on the other hand, there's this Samael, who would be the negative or the evil counterpart of Michael. And he's also known as the Satan in Jewish religion. So rabbinic literature talks about this. Whenever the people of Israel does good deeds, Michael goes to God and provides God with a report of their good deeds. But whenever the people of Israel sin, then Samuel goes to God and accuses the Jewish people. And they are even referred to by Greek words. So the Satan is called the categor, who is the accuser. And then Michael is called the sanegor, who is like like the lawyer who defends the people of Israel.
Yeah. Also, before you hit play again, I also
Mhm.
wanted to mention that when Rippenger seemed like, if I followed him correctly, he
Mhm.
was talking about the idea of the elect who have been like chosen before time by God.
Mhm.
That is a very Protestant and particularly Calvinist idea of how salvation works.
Mhm.
In the Catholic Church, the way that they the way that Catholic theologians typically get around the idea that God is omniscient and that human free will exists is essentially to say that God exists outside of time.
Mhm.
So therefore, God has perfect knowledge of the consequences of human action. So, for example, if I decided, you know what, after this live stream is over, I'm going to go out and rob a bank and kill a bunch of people, which I'm not going to do.
Mhm.
God would know if I'm going to do that or not. And God would know if I'm going to, we can see your Discord. Um,
Oh, sorry.
and God would know that I would, not repent and go to hell for having committed murder. But if I say, you know what, I'm not going to go rob a bank and murder people. Instead, I'm going to go and cook dinner for my family. God's going to see, okay, well, she's not going to go to hell because of what she did today, right?
Mhm.
Um, so you're never so so human free will is not negated, and the idea that you're either saved or you're damned and there's nothing you can do about that does not exist in Catholicism.
Mhm. So we can see right now that he's like mixing and combining different traditions, different periods, different theologies, just to make his point.
Yeah.
And perhaps for the sake of this kind of program, it would be valid, but it isn't the. So the problem is that this reaches lots of people, and as I said, not everyone will be able to be fact checking Father Ripperger about his each and every statement.
Yeah, exactly. And And also figures like Rippenger are ways that Calvinist ideas about predestination, which, again, according to the Catholic Church, predestination is a formal heresy.
Mhm.
As a Catholic, as a practicing Catholic, I am not allowed to believe in predestination, because if I do, I am going against the teaching of the church, and therefore I am in trouble, right?
Right.
But Rippenger, by presenting this idea using Catholic language, is arguably leading
Mhm.
people into incorrect understandings.
Exactly. Okay. So,
Was free chosen for certain people to go to heaven. Yeah, because God, if you remember, it's actually part of divine revelation. Christ said, many are called, but few are chosen. And it's God who chooses. It doesn't mean that we don't cooperate in that process. We have to cooperate in the lead up to it, but ultimately it's God who gives us the final grace to make to bridge the gap between ourselves and Him, right? But so in the Catholic Church, we actually we call it a non-mutual predestination. We believe that God chooses who gets to go to heaven, but and there's indications of that, but if you end up in hell, that's your own fault, because you could have, if you had cooperated with God, you could have made it to heaven, type of thing. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, can you
So he's
pause
the
real
guardian.
quick? Yeah, and again, we see like the idea that God doesn't send you to hell, you send yourself to hell by, refusing to accept God's grace.
mhm.
And the idea that salvation ultimately comes through God's grace, and all you have to do is just accept it. That is is an absolutely standard Catholic belief. But he's mixing that in with something that's leaving space for this very Calvinist idea of election. But it's all getting mixed in together, like kind of like when you want to give a dog a pill, you have to like get a piece of meat and stick the pill inside the meat, and that'll get the dog to swallow it. That's what it feels like Ripperger is doing. He's sneaking the little Calvinist pill into the cube of meat.
Yeah. And well, I'm not sure if he's doing this consciously or unconsciously, if he's getting a bit distracted during this kind of recordings, because I mean, we all do it, and I make mistakes when we're in a live stream or whatever. So who knows?
Yeah.
Perhaps
Yeah.
he's just not being able to separate it, or he's being intentional about it.
Yeah.
We cannot tell.
Angel of the elect. So that meant that that's why it was his job to kick out the demons from the company of the angels that remained faithful, who were the elect. And so he's the one that kicked him out of heaven. Because he's the guardian angel of the elect, that also means that he became the guardian angel of the Jews, the Jewish religion, in the beginning, because they were the chosen people. But once, according to the fathers of the church, they apostatized and rejected Christ, they ceased being the chosen religion and the chosen people. And now it's transferred to Christians who believe in Christ. They are now those who are he's the guardian angel of the elect, of those of us who believe in Christ. And so that's actually also why historically the saints have talked about how when a person who is destined to go to heaven dies, it's Saint Michael who accompanies them into God's presence.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out at the idea of supersessionism, which is what Father Ripperger just described, that the Jews apostated, and then it is now the Catholic Church or Christianity, which is the who are the chosen ones. But after Council Vatican II, this idea has been disregarded. So he's appealing to an older version of this belief.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out that the rejection of supersessionism after Vatican II is one of the major reasons why people like Chad Rippenger have a problem with Vatican II, is because they are unwilling to let go of the idea that the old covenant, the what Catholics call the old covenant, the covenant that was made between God and the Jews, is still valid. And which is why they will consider, why some people will consider Pope John Paul II, who in a lot of ways was really friendly to a lot of more socially and theologically conservative Catholics, will still reject John Paul II because he said in so many words that the old covenant has not been abrogated. The old covenant, the covenant with the Jews are still the chosen people, right? It's just that Christians have been kind of also let in, right? And given the opportunity to also be chosen in a different way. But yeah, exactly. And so this rejection of this refusal to accept that supersessionism is no longer being taught is a major sticking point for people like Father Rippenger.
Right. So I hope the audience is already grasping at how how complex this kind of claims that he's spitting out in this program are. So it isn't that easy. It is there's lots of information, there are lots of opinions, and he's trying to, at least if he were able to, or if he had the time to explain to us about supersessionism and telling us the ace has been disregarded by the Catholic Church since Vatican II, but I have chosen not to follow it, then that would be more honest on his behalf, rather than just showing it as a fact which for all Catholics.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that the reason why Chad Rippenger is running around all over YouTube talking to anybody who will book him for an interview, is because he really doesn't have access to institutional power. He, he's not a bishop. He's a priest who is, living in a very small town in Colorado and writing a bunch of books and appearing on a lot of podcasts. But he's not in any way like powerful within the institutional church.
Correct. And that is a problem as well, because he is a religious authority, but he doesn't have the power to make weighty decisions.
Right. His only power comes from getting enough people to agree with him and follow him, that the hierarchy of the Catholic Church can't easily get rid of him.
Exactly. And I think that he's appealing to the shock factor, because if I'm being honest with you, my favorite horror movies are about exorcisms. So I guess I'm not alone in here when people just get this wow or shock factor from an exorcist, a Catholic priest, talking about these sensitive topics, because you would then get the idea that he knows better, right? He knows
Yeah.
he knows his.
Yeah, and I think that there are probably a lot of, just your average Catholics might, see a book, a Catholic priest talks about exorcism
Mhm.
and read it and enjoy it in the same way that somebody who has a more, secular point of view might like read a Stephen King novel or go to see a horror movie. It's the same kind of just, human desire to be entertained by a scary story. Um, and then, and that, but again, the problem is that by doing that, he's he's getting people in and then teaching them things that are, you know, I would argue, harmful for people to believe as people because it doesn't cause you to treat other people well. And from, a religious point of view, is in many cases demonstrably heresy or is coming very close to actually encouraging people to believe in heresy.
Right. I don't want to be unfair with the way I represent this, but I would like to think of Father Rippenger and people like him as because of the of his published books in a sense as perhaps this is contemporary apocryphal literature uh, uh, and being contrasted with perhaps some books written like perhaps by John Paul II,
Yeah,
Benedict, who come from the higher echelons of the Catholic Church.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we're the chosen people now. Yeah. Anybody who believes in Christ is chosen. That's right. Which is actually the big mistake that people make is still thinking that they're the Jews are the chosen people. They were, but they rejected their inheritance. They refused to accept Christ because even the Jewish religion was ultimately a lead up to and a partial revelation in relationship to Christ. So once he came, this is why Christ was so harsh on them. The first time I read this, I was stunned. St. Thomas Aquinas actually makes the observation. He said that the prophets and the patriarchs of the Jews actually knew that God was triumphant, and they knew he was going to become incarnate. They knew this because we see this in the book of Isaiah. It's revealed in the book of Isaiah, and it's revealed in various parts of Scripture so the Jews actually knew this. This is why Christ was so harsh on the Jews that when he came, he said, "You guys shouldn't. You guys knew this." You're calling me that make myself equal to the Son of God. You knew that God was going to become incarnate. Is basically what's being taught there. So the point being is that the fact that they apostatized and rejected ultimately God in the end, which is why they ceased being the chosen people, which is why God gives them that, as I mentioned before, he gives them maybe I didn't mention it to you, but he gave them one generation. So after Christ dies in the year 70 AD, the Romans destroy Jerusalem, and that's why now none of the Jews are practicing their religion because none of them are offering sacrifice. That doesn't mean that they're not living up according to certain parts of the Old Testament and things of that sort, but they're not actually performing the ceremonial laws.
So,
I'm sorry, I just have to say that
sure.
the distinction between ceremonial laws and religious laws and things like that is an entirely artificial distinction that was made originally by Thomas Aquinas, who wanted to distinguish between Jewish laws, or rather, not Jewish laws, but the law that was laid down in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, because basically Aquinas wanted like the things like, say, burning witches and homosexuality, or rather men having sexual relations with other men. um Aquinas wanted he wanted to keep those laws, but he wanted to get rid of the ones about temple sacrifice So he made this distinction between the two that really don't exist in either in Deuteronomy or Leviticus, and also don't exist in the way that Jews understand Jewish law.
Right. And another point I would like to single out is that so he's talking about the book of Isaiah. If you remember the first live streams we had before Lent, um, the um, the lectionary had lots of readings from the book of Isaiah, and we provided some historical background on that book. And of course, we should always bear in mind that there's two different ways of interpreting. So if you want to use church history and church interpretation, of course, Father Rippenger would be correct on this one. But on the other hand, if we're talking about a historical background, we will see that those claims do not hold up because they are referring to the Jewish people in the case of the suffering servant described in Isaiah, and referring to this person being born from a virgin or from a damsel or a young
Yeah,
woman
yeah,
being
yeah. And it's also worth pointing out that because um because the Catholic tradition of interpreting scripture allows for both the allegorical and the historical meaning of the text to be true. The position that Isaiah was speaking of an actual young woman who was pregnant at that time, who gave birth to a child, and then all this stuff happened, and that those verses were also meant to prefigure Christ. From a Catholic point of view, both of those things can be true at the same time. So, so the idea that there's only one way, one legitimate way of reading Isaiah, and that's of reading Isaiah as a prophecy about Jesus, and to say that Jewish people, that Isaiah knew that, and that everybody who read it prior to the birth of Jesus really knew that and just didn't want to admit it, again, is historically illiterate, and also trying to make the Catholic tradition of interpretation a lot less honest and a lot narrower than it ever has been.
Exactly. So just to, let's say, turn the tables on Father Rippenger, I guess he would not be quite receptive if someone would bring into this discussion, Gnostic Gospels or any other kind of Christianity before what we know now as the Catholic Church. He would not like people citing, the Gospel of Thomas, Basilides, Noetus of Smyrna, Cerinthus, whoever you want, any of those Christian leaders who did not make it into the Catholic tradition. But he's just singling out this, defending his view of the Catholic position.
Yeah. And it's also worth pointing out that there were people who thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. There were people who thought the point is that there were many candidates for this guy is the Messiah, and a lot of times the prophecies in Isaiah would get dragged out as evidence to show that Sabbatai Zvi was the Messiah, or that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. So the idea that that even people who believed that there was going to be a Messiah would have had no other choice but to say, oh yeah, it must be Jesus, again, is ridiculous.
And suffice it to say is that as so he's pointing out to the book of Isaiah and interpreting as foreshadowing Christ. The Jews also have their interpretation and the figures mentioned in the book of Isaiah. So it's everyone has their own interpretation.
Mhm.
Interesting. And that's why they're so driven to rebuild the temple. I've heard people say that they think that Michael is Christ himself. Is there any validity to that? No, nothing. So Christ, which we know from divine revelation, is God who assumed a human nature. Saint Michael is an angel, which is a different angel, a different nature altogether. Okay.
So just to mention here, so there were some Christian beliefs about which identified in the past Jesus or the Christ as the angel Michael, and there's these traditions where in Jewish tradition, for example, where there is this some heavenly figure who is sitting next to God, but it isn't Christ, in my opinion. So perhaps people would have heard about the angel Metatron, which is very prominent in the later rabbinic writings and into the Middle Ages. And he's the patriarch Enoch, who transfigured into this most high angel. And in the older traditions, the functions, the skills, the abilities of both Michael and Metatron were like mixed up. So we would have then some people who would think that Michael would be the heavenly high priest, just as Jesus is the heavenly high priest in the letter to the Hebrews. So this is a very old idea, which would be regarded as heresy in the Catholic Church, but that doesn't mean that there weren't other beliefs where there was this spiritual being of a very high nature who was sitting next to God.
Is there anything else in the hierarchy we should know? Um, Other than in my book, I talk about, go into detail about what each individual rank is actually for. But the main thing is that people need to really start relying on them more because they're here to protect us.
I'm sorry, I need to run to the bathroom real quick.
Sure. Do you want me to
Yeah,
wait for you?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay.
Let's talk about witchcraft for a little bit. What is it? So basically what witchcraft is it's the inversion of the proper worship that's due to God. And so what they do is they engage in rituals. So it has the same kinds of things like as Catholics we have things such as sacramentals that we use, which are blessed items. They have cursed items that they use. They have rituals. So we have same kind of ritual. They invert our rituals very often. And then also they have like quasi sacraments and things of that sort. So they basically it's the inversion, but it's basically a set of rituals and belief systems which use demons as a medium to bring about the effect of their rituals. So different from us, we pray to Christ and then Christ causes these things to happen. They basically do these rituals to empower the demons so that they can do them.
So I just want to point to this, to the fact that the use of magic or witchcraft has always been a way of defining the other. So what is what we would call religion for ourselves, um, when the other one has a set of beliefs, then this is either called witchcraft or heresy, or a false religion or whatever. So they go into different categories, but they are, that is just to point out that social distinction between a group and the rest of the groups to preserve their identity.
You mentioned the 9 choirs earlier. What is that?
So the 9 choirs are the breakdown. So the choirs are, each angel was created with a specific task, and those tasks are grouped into they're into groups. So the top group, as I mentioned, the seraphim, that's the top choir. There is
Okay.
about, so it's based in groups based upon what their assigned task is.
Okay. In Black Mass, you had brought that up a couple of times.
If you
Black
can
Mass?
pause real
Well,
quick. The idea that there is like some kind of a hierarchy of angels is not okay. There's the idea that there are the archangels, right? Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. And those are the only angels who are named. And therefore, in Catholicism, it's like those are the named angels. Those are the ones that, like, it's okay to ask for their help and their intercession. And then there's an idea that everybody has like a personal guardian angel whose name you don't know, by the way. And like even trying to figure out your guardian angel's name is kind of not something that you're supposed to do, because the idea is that there might be a temptation to try to control those angels by knowing their names. So this whole like big elaborate hierarchy of the choirs of angels, and you have this rank of angel is below that rank of angel, is something that Rippenger is borrowing from a lot of Protestant angelology, and really is not it is not something that has ever really belonged to Catholicism, because because one of the ways that the Catholic Church distinguishes between religion and magic, and of course there are a lot of ways to draw that line, is that basically religion is asking God for something, and that magic is telling a spirit to do something. And that, basically the idea is that if you get too heavily into trying to control angels, you end up doing magic, which is not good.
Correct. And well, suffice it to say that, as you mentioned, this angelology is Protestant, but it isn't biblical as well. So it is a later development. Just so people know that so perhaps just because you're talking about angels, it doesn't mean that it comes from the Bible. So it is a later tradition which has evolved along the centuries.
Mhm.
Mass is the inversion of the Catholic Mass. So basically, what they'll do is, depending on the type of Black Mass, sometimes they'll actually just literally do a Mass, but in reverse. So they'll actually use Latin, and they'll talk, but it's spoken backwards. If they happen to have a consecrated host, they'll actually use that during the Black Mass in order to desecrate it. And
Okay,
in the
can you
context of that, in
pause?
order to empower themselves.
Mhm.
Okay, now it actually is worth mentioning that like Black masses do exist in the world. They tend to be done by like what's the best way to describe them? Basically edgy teenagers, or like other, like, basically it tends to be very small group groups of people who have convinced themselves that they should be Satanists, more or less for the shock value. And it's really not some like, big global, grand conspiracy. And it's also not something that happens on a regular basis. However, like people deciding to do weird things with a host is something that actually happens in the world, like to the point that like extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, which are basically the lay people who are allowed to assist the priest in distributing Jesus during the Mass, are generally told, just make sure that the person eats the host and swallows so that they aren't like trying to sneak them out, that they aren't trying to like kidnap Jesus, essentially. Which is actually one of the reasons why the preference is to have the person distributing it, to place it directly on the person's tongue to make sure that they aren't going to do anything hinky with it.
Exactly. Yeah, that is this is another shock factor. So he isn't really giving the background which Katie gave, and this leads people to believe that there is something sinister. I mean, I'm not saying that that it may be offensive to Catholics, this kind of behavior of just performing a mass backwards, but trying to blow it up out of proportion in that sense.
Yeah.
As if there is this underground movement which is moving the strings and trying to bring people into, the dark forces, Satan, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. And especially the way that Rippenger, because he's talking to Catholics who are aware that, like, okay, there's just that an individual Catholic knows, okay, well, there's my parish church, but then there's, a lot of other churches out there, and you just kind of know that they exist. Rippenger wants you to think that for every Catholic church, there's also some kind of satanic secret organization going on in your neighborhood. And no, like my neighbors are not, going out and holding black masses in their backyard. I'm sure of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then they can also, Black Mass can also be just a Catholic Mass with satanic elements as part of it. For example, one Black Mass, which is mentioned in a book called Windswept House by Malachi Martin. It's in the first two to three chapters, where a particular priest, I won't go into names, but a particular priest performs a Black Mass, but in the context of that, he desecrates a host by raping a young girl during the Mass. So you have, so the goal is to desecrate the body of blood of Christ.
Could you pause really quick? Okay. Just because he mentioned Malachi Martin and Windswept House. Windswept House is a work of fiction. Malachi Martin was a Irish Catholic priest who at some point in the 1980s was released from what asked to be and was released from his vows as a Catholic priest, and basically spent the rest of his life sort of writing novels that purported to expose, these like evil plots to undermine the Catholic Church, and is still gave a bunch of television interviews. He was kind of Rippenger before Rippenger. And is still tremendously popular with a lot of self-described traditionalist Catholics. But the idea that anyone is taking Malachi Martin seriously about anything is just it is just completely ridiculous.
Right, and we go back to this shock factor. So I remember, now that you mentioned Malachi Martin, I remember watching this documentary on Netflix a couple of years ago, and you know, you just sit by the edge of your chair watching that, um, but beyond the this kind of circus that goes around exorcism, I do not see much value
Yeah.
into actual practical religion in the sense of becoming better people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's worth mentioning that Malachi Martin kind of made his name because people who believed that they were like under attack by a demon, and in many cases went to their parish priest and said, this is what's going on with me. And the parish priest said, I think that, you or the person that you're concerned about is having some kind of a mental health issue.
Mhm.
You should seek treatment for that. Or they might say, I'll be glad to come and pray with you, but what's going on doesn't sound to me like demonic possession, and very, appropriately and calmly and gently told, guided someone into what the priest felt was an appropriate understanding of what was going on to them with them. um, then they wouldn't be happy with that answer, and they would turn to somebody like Malachi Martin, who would reinforce their belief that whatever was going on with them was the result of a demon trying to hurt them, and
Mhm.
would then perform an exorcism or something like that on his own, like just on his own authority. And and there were cases where people were and are genuinely harmed by a priest who's willing to give an exorcism when that is not the appropriate course of action.
Right. I mean, I do not want to downplay people having that kind of experiences, but some people may be highly suggestible because of this, of the way these exorcists are presenting the information.
Yes, exactly. Well, no, and I'm not even, hi Tuco. I'm absolutely not saying that demonic possession isn't something that can happen to people. And I'm not saying that exorcists aren't in some cases necessary.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is that exorcism is, in the modern understanding of the Catholic Church, exorcism is not the first diagnosis.
Correct.
Exorcism is, you rule out, okay, is the person having mental health problems? Is the person being abused? Is the person, have they just kind of, have they become convinced that they have something going on with them,
Mhm.
when really what they need is, mental health counseling or just, social support. And then once all of those possibilities have been ruled out, then they go to exorcism. Or at most, in some cases, the ritual might be performed in the belief that that's what the person needs to get over whatever personal or spiritual challenges they're facing, without necessarily confirming or denying that it's actually demon possession.
Mhm.
um so the idea that, oh, somebody is having a crisis, it's immediately demon possession and you immediately do an exorcism, is not something that is being endorsed by the Catholic Church.
Right. It may have worked in the past, but not anymore.
That's the real goal. Because in that desecration, then it empowers the demons and it empowers the people.
What would this, I mean, do people attend this, or is this a one-man show?
Well, there's usually a satanic priest who performs the mass. So in that sense, it's a one-man show. But there's always other people involved, because you'll have people whose function is to maintain control over the victims, who's going to be used for this, or other people who, like, their servers, like at a Catholic mass, you have different people doing different kinds of services, serving in relationship to the actual ritual. And then very often there's other people standing around who are chanting and doing other things.
Okay, so we can see now that the host is getting really concerned, and he's even deeply sighing because of this information the exorcist is revealing to him.
Yeah.
Is this what's going on with the Bohemian Grove?
Well, my understanding of the Bohemian Grove is what I studied it to the degree that a person can study it and have verifiable evidence of what's actually happening here. But it seems to me that it's at its root and core just basic Moloch worship, because they have the large statue of Moloch there.
So now we're getting into conspiracy theories about this, the elites, and just to mention it by passing, perhaps even related to what is happening with the Epstein files in the US right now. All these kind of conspiracy theories about the elites performing rituals and doing atrocious things to people. So he's riffing on that, and the biblical figure of Moloch. So Moloch is a word which appears in the Hebrew Bible, and it was interpreted as a kind of god, a deity. And there was this commandment where God commanded the people not to pass their sons through the fire of Moloch. But the scholarly point of view, the scholarly position more recently is that Moloch only means a kind of sacrifice. So there's actually no deity called Moloch. And well, in case there is, it is a later invention or a later interpretation of the word Moloch.
I want to move into lead darkness and satanic ritual abuse. Okay. What have you encountered?
When I first started doing this work, the number of people that were we'd see satanic ritual abuse was fairly few. There you just didn't see a whole lot of it, and the caseload was from the 1980s. So that's when you saw the satanic ritual abuse occurring, was in the 1980s, and it did not tend to be, at least from what we could gather, in relationship to the elite. But then, over the course of the 18 years that I've been doing this work, we kind of went through a time period where there wasn't just a whole lot of stuff, and then it started to really crop up again, where we started to see a significant rise in satanic ritual abuse, but it was across the board. It wasn't necessarily just the elite; it was also people in high positions, because they would come out.
Yeah, okay. What he's talking about in the 1980s is something that you'll generally see referred to as the Satanic Panic. And that basically consisted of a whole lot of people, like Chad Rippenger, although he's kind of in the generation that came just after that, were absolutely convinced that there was widespread physical and spiritual and sexual abuse of children going on, including things like the sacrifice of infants. And the long and the short of it is there is absolutely no evidence of anything like what was being alleged in terms of satanic ritual abuse, in spite of which there were people who were convicted and went to prison because of what were very often false memories that were um, that were recovered via hypnosis, that were in many cases implanted into the minds of children who may or may not have actually been abused by a parent, but it didn't have this like weird satanic thing going on. And it's kind of the same way with, is it true that a whole lot of very rich and powerful people all know each other and go to the same parties, and that some of them do really terrible things? Well, I mean, yeah, the Epstein files has shown that that's true. But the idea that this is some kind of organized global network of Satanists that includes your child, that potentially includes your child's kindergarten teacher, is nonsense, and it's dangerous nonsense.
Correct, yeah.
Who was a satanic ritual abuser, and sometimes they were fairly high. But now what we're seeing is it's pretty much across the board, where we're seeing it in all levels of society of the people getting involved in it.
All levels of society.
So you'll see people who are, involved in satanic ritual abuse. There's actually a book called 22 Faces. It's about a woman who has dissociative identity disorder, but she was basically a victim of satanic ritual abuse. And that's a paradigmatic case because you can look at it and just realize, yeah, this is how it normally works. But it basically was, to the credit of the Mormons, in fact, they found out that there was a lot of satanic ritual abuse occurring within their ranks, and they cleaned it up. Last I heard, I don't know exactly the details, but she basically, but it was the people that were doing it were people of low level, the common person you actually see on the streets. But then you'll also see it from middle tier people who are trying to advance themselves. And then as I mentioned, satanic ritual abuse is some of the stuff that they've talked about in relationship to some of the things that have been happening in the church at the higher levels. But we've also seen, I haven't dealt with these two cases too much because demons that are higher level in relationship to the civil authorities, other exorcists maybe closer to the area, have come across that type of thing more because the satanic ritual abuse stuff tends to be somewhat localized to deal with local cases a lot of times. Part of that has to do with the fact that in my particular experience, but this is not the experience of every exorcist, is that the demons tend to talk more about the power structure within the church and who's involved in that, because they see that as where the real power is, not so much in the context of the civil authorities. Yeah, they have power, but the real spiritual power is in the context.
Okay, two things. First of all, I have spent a fair amount of time learning about the history of the LDS Church. And this is the first time I have ever heard an allegation that the LDS Church had a satanic ritual abuse problem that they got rid of. Now, it is indeed the case that the LDS Church has a problem with children being abused, and has and has demonstrably been failing to protect children, partially because the LDS bishops are being given inadequate guidance about what they should do in a situation where they're faced with abuse. And that's something that, if people want to find out more about, I encourage them to check out Nemo the Mormon and the Mormon Stories podcast, which have done a really good job documenting the current issues within the LDS Church. But the idea that there's some kind of weird satanic plot that was going on in the LDS Church is, again, just ridiculous. And also, I want to point out the way that Father Rippenger in this thing is trying to suggest that within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, there's this network of Satanists, right? Which is, of course, a really convenient way for him, who is kind of existing on the very periphery of access to institutional power. Because, like, Father Rippenger is in his 60s. That's at the age where if he was, that's at the age where people who are, where priests who are doing a really good job and who are, basically good examples of what priests should be, will very often get promoted to bishop. Nobody is offering Father Rippenger a promotion, right? He's being allowed to stay where he is for now, but he's going to live and die as a Catholic priest, which is fine. There's lots of very fine priests who do a really good job in their, particular parish, and that's their thing. But at the same time, again, he's insinuating that the people who will tell him to sit down and shut up are in league with Satan. And he's doing that so that when and if he does get told to sit down and shut up, he can still carry on with his happy little life on YouTube and being a celebrity exorcist, right? Because after all, who are you going to believe? Father Rippenger or some random Satanist?
Correct. And I think he's banking on the idea of mixing abuse with satanic ritual abuse. So what I mean by that is that he wants us to believe that any kind of abuse comes from a satanic ritual or from a satanic group, which I'm not denying people could be evil, but that doesn't mean that each and every one belong to some kind of obscure dark organization.
Yeah, exactly. Like, people are perfectly capable of doing terrible things just because they want to do terrible things. And it's also, worth pointing out that, the Catholic Church in the past, 20, 30 years has actually been making a real concerted effort to keep children from being abused. And that, and yes, a lot of really horrible things happened in the 20th century, and the Catholic Church is trying to fix those problems. So what he's doing by putting the focus on Satanists is actually really dangerous for the effort to deal with the problem as it exists. Because if you're looking for a Satanist, you're not looking for someone who presents themselves as a good person and in private is doing really horrible things.
And the problem is that in that way, he's just, let's say, taking power for himself. Because
Yeah.
if he takes it away from the people, or let's say from the hands of the authorities, and makes you believe that everything is uh, a satanic, a spiritual evil, then the authorities are just are not necessary, but his power, his knowledge is necessary. And I think that is dangerous.
Yes.
I think we're gonna make it, Katie.
Yeah,
We're just like,
yeah, we've got a minute. We can do it.
let's do it.
Okay.
Where do these rituals, what are some of the rituals? I know this could get very gruesome, but what are some of the rituals? How ancient are they?
Well, they stem almost all the way back. In fact, some of the ritual abuses stem all the way back to the golden calf and some of the stuff even before that. So, but the satanic ritual abuse, there's the black mass where they rape a woman that's or a girl. Usually it's a virgin. They want a virgin that they rape. So usually it's a girl around 10 years of age or younger. It can also be where this is in 22 Faces, where you actually have uh, where the satanic ritual abuse is where they take one girl they kidnap this one girl and they basically tie her down so that she can't do anything. And then they took the other girl, which is in the toy face, and then they tie her down. And then they make this girl watch them systematically torture and kill the other child. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like let's keep in mind that nobody has managed to find examples of you have managed to find examples of children who have been murdered in that way. Which of course is one of the things that has kept the Catholic Church for the most part from really going all in on witch hunts and hunts for Satanists and everything else, is because most Catholic priests, if you ran to them screaming about oh, they're Satanists, they're going to ask you for evidence, right? You say that a baby was murdered, okay, well, where's the body? Where's the birth certificate of this child? Where's the report that this child was kidnapped? Well, there isn't one. And just kind of in the face of that lack of evidence, a lot of it falls away. And then, of course, you have people like Rippenger who are just convincing people to believe just like absolute nonsense and absolute works of fiction. And it's just not a good thing to have out there in the world.
I agree, yes. And the aside from the shocking conclusion of the video, it is new to me to know that these satanic ritual abuse rituals, these rituals are good as far back as the golden calf. So this is the first time I've heard that the golden calf was a satanic ritual.
Yeah. Well, and that of course, goes into Rippenger's obsession with the demonic, because he wants to argue that anything that isn't part of his version of what the Catholic Church should look like, which is no doubt a version of the Catholic Church in which Chad Rippenger is Pope. I may be being unfair to him, but I don't think I am. He wants to be, basically he wants to be in charge, so he's kind of creating his own little group of people who will listen to him and not listen to, frankly, the Pope.
Mhm.
And that is, one of those things that's going to cause some problems.
Yes. And once again, so he's using the Bible as a weapon to support his claims about satanic ritual abuse. So I think it would be really difficult to trace back any of those rituals actually to the Bible or to any other ancient sources.
Well, and I mean, it's worth mentioning that the idea of um, that the idea of Satan as being someone that could be as a separate entity that could be worshipped, who's opposed to God,
Mhm.
wasn't an idea that had developed at the time that the Exodus is supposed to have happened.
Mhm.
So even if we're allowing that there really are people that have worshiped Satan, which, yes, Satanists exist, right?
Mhm.
Anton LaVey wrote a book, Satanists exist. But you can't have Satanists before you have the concept of Satan.
Right.
Um, again, it's just he's kind of it's like he has this idea in his mind of the way that the world works today, and he thinks that, well, that's the way that it's always worked, and
Right.
it's just no. Okay. um so I think that's kind of all we have for today, unless there was anything else that you had to say about Father Rippenger in closing.
No, what I would say is that this is the first video I've watched where he appears, and it was shocking to me in the sense that there's so much bias. There's perhaps I'm being harsh to him, but I sense lots of hate for some groups of people, and I think that is not useful for society. But and that he's exaggerating some claims just to draw attention to his work.
Okay. So, in that case, we will close for the day. And on Sunday, we will be here to talk about the readings for the fifth Sunday in Lent. We're almost done. It's
Mhm.
almost Easter. And then coming up on next Thursday, we will be discussing some of the current controversy regarding the Amazonian right, which also involves accusations of Satanism. So we're continuing with the theme.
Great.
We will see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.